welcome to this week's podcast on YouTube, subject to how you are watching or listening to us. I am super excited about the fantastic guest I have this week. I'm not sure if he knows or not, but Social B and all the guys at our team worship practically the the ground he walks on. As soon as there's a mention of Rand, we're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So I'm just gonna give you a bit of insight if you aren't lucky enough to know who Rand is, but Rand is formerly the CEO and co-founder of Moz, which is some amazing SEO software. And he's now gone on to create another amazing piece of software, which I think is probably pretty unique in the market. I'm not aware of any other software that does it, but it basically carries out quality market research and audience insight. SparkToro is its name. And we talk about it in all of our training sessions that we do. And we'll often share when people ask, like, how can I find out what my audience is doing or where they are? So he is one of the co-founders, I think, Rand, on SparkToro, along with another gentleman.
Yeah, that's right, Lynsey. And thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. We're very excited to have you. And for anybody that doesn't subscribe to SparkToro's blog, please subscribe. There is so much useful, actionable insight there from a marketer's point of view. So please subscribe. But there was one particular blog that got my attention a couple of weeks ago, and it was the one about the content marketing paradox. Now, as a digital agency, we work with B2B and B2C target audiences, and many of them will be listening today. We have, a broad listenership and watchership on YouTube, and they're often asking, should I do content marketing? What's the value? And we're always sharing with them about putting the customer's shoes on, regardless if it's B2B, B2C, you need content to drive that conversion. So this is why Rand's blog post really got my attention, because it was really focused on the paradox of content marketing and how you can't just create content marketing, you need to go a bit deeper. So Rand, I really wanted to chat to you today about what you've found out in your 20 years plus of creating content and the amazing bit of nugget of information that you've found.
Happy to, Lynsey. So the long story short is that I think many folks assume that they're making content marketing investments for a single reason, right? That they want to drive more conversions or trying to get more traffic, or they want to improve their SEO and get higher rankings, or rank for more different keywords in Google. Or maybe they're doing it for social media marketing or to grow an email marketing audience. And I think the challenge is there's a disconnect between here is the goal of our content marketing and here is who we target that content toward in order to have success with it. This is the paradox, right? The paradox of content marketing is that the audience that you are ultimately creating it for may not be the one that helps it become successful. And so you get into a world where you produce a fantastic piece that if your target market would only read it, if they would only come watch your video or check out your podcast series or subscribe to your email newsletter or read your blog or check out your amazing industry report, they would be overwhelmed, they'd be blown away, and you would be very likely to convert them. And the problem is no one is amplifying it. No one is helping it spread because it doesn't appeal to people who spread content like that. Instead, it's targeted at potential buyers. And then the reverse is also true, right? The other side of the paradox is you make content that is amazing for earning amplification and getting eyeballs and being spread across the web by people with influence and talked about by journalists and picked up by blogs, and it doesn't really convert anyone. So content marketers are stuck in this paradox, and I think have been for a long time, will always continue to be. And there's a whole bunch of challenges around that, but the key part that I think is important for marketers is at least recognizing this paradox and knowing that you're facing this challenge.
And I think it was really interesting to read that, because alongside that, there's a piece of research, which I'm not sure if you're aware of, is the B2B Gartner guide of how actually, people go about content from the clients that we work with and from many of the organizations we speak to, whether it's talking at conferences or training or doing it for clients. They're always focused on, oh, the person knows that I've got this problem, so let's just create the solution, where the B2B Gartner guide, and obviously this is especially around B2B, there's this whole problem identification process, this solution exploration, this requirements building, then supplier selection. But too many organizations are trying to focus on the requirements building and not the problem identification. And I think what I really liked in your blog post is you're almost identifying sort of the beginner person to the advanced person. It's not just like one content piece, is it, from that perspective?
Yeah, I think there's definitely value in serving different audiences with different pieces of content. I've done that a lot in my career. You know, at Moz, obviously, I created a ton of content that was around beginners who are looking to learn SEO and get into the practice, and then a lot of more advanced pieces that are clearly designed to appeal to experts and folks who know their stuff, and uses terminology that would probably throw a beginner off, and also it's so industry insider that it doesn't resonate with those folks. And both can work, right? Both can work well. So I think there's definitely a path to conversion and to becoming a customer. And there's also a path to earning an audience, right? So, there's content I've created that speaks to an audience I know I already have. Right. And that audience tends to be people who are familiar with SparkToro, and they know what audience intelligence is, and they understand how we gather data, and they sort of have, they've tried the tool a bunch of times, right, and run some searches, and they get it. And then there's content that I create that is intentionally made for folks who've never visited SparkToro before, don't know what the company does or is, don't know who I am. I wrote a big post last week about, the zero-click problem in Google, and used some data from SimilarWeb. I knew that a lot of news sources would link to it, a lot of technology communities would link to it. And so I presented it in a way that you didn't need any familiarity with me or SparkToro in order to be able to grasp that piece. And so, there's, look, this is one of the challenges of content. I think this is true in terms of creation of any kind, right? When you are creating work that is meant to be consumed and appreciated by others, you have to both know your audience and also recognize that almost nothing you ever make will be for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So linked to that, if people are planning content to reach high consumption, different audience, how are they best to go about that, do you think?
I think that your first challenge in any of these scenarios is discovering who your audience, your target core audience is, and then understanding whether you're creating content directly for them because you're already reaching them, or whether you don't yet reach them. And so you need to build an audience, attract an audience, and that probably means starting higher up in the funnel, right? That probably means starting higher up in the hierarchy of who you're trying to reach in terms of influential sources and publications and people who can amplify that content. And that is a different kind of content marketing. That's a different strategy. You're going to use different tactics. You're going to create something different. I think the problem, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this tons of times, Lynsey, whether it's an agency or a consultant or an in-house person, they make content that they think is for their target customer who's nearly ready to buy. And they haven't considered whether they are actually reaching that person, and how will they reach that person if they haven't already. So you've got to identify where you are in the journey and who you need to appeal to in order to attract that group.
Absolutely. And some people will have heard on other sessions we've run, I'm lucky enough to do stuff for Google. We apply the sort of the See, Think, Do, Care. So the C, I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, Rand, but the C is your target audience. They've got a problem and they're searching, but they have no intent. But how can you reach that sort of higher funnel, as you put it, in terms of make them, they're totally unaware of you, but how can you make them aware of you, resonating with them, and not just them, but how can you then get them to dial up actually sharing with their audiences as well. And probably the zero-click Google was a very good example of that, because people were like, wow, didn't know that was happening. What do I need to be aware of, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, the very interesting part about something like the zero-click publishing, which essentially is, here's research data that is broadly interesting to the sort of technology and government and antitrust and people who are thinking about big tech monopoly power. That's not necessarily SparkToro's audience at all, right? That's, some of those people will be interested. But what I'm hoping with that research is that folks will understand, SparkToro is a company founded by folks who understand gathering data at large scale, analyzing it, and turning it into useful, applicable outputs. And that is it's a positioning move, right? It's a positioning and a branding move. I think what I was not anticipating things like, oh, Google's going to write a retaliatory blog post and sort of that's going to turn into a whole controversy and, Rand versus Google. That's not the framing I was hoping for, but these things happen. I think anytime there's a big media coverage of something, you get some of those unexpected twists and turns. But I do think that thinking about those different goals and then trying to apply those to your content practices is far more effective than simply the classic content marketing formula of who's my target audience, where can I reach them, what content would they appreciate. It misses the big question. Like, Lynsey, to me, the big question is, who will help amplify this and why?
Yeah.
And until you have an amazing answer to that question, you are not going to be able to reach the audiences as effectively as someone who has answered that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So on that basis, what process do you typically see in the audience process, and what can you do you think, to help make that even better?
Yeah, so one of the things I really, really like, and obviously this is somewhat self-serving with SparkToro, but is doing some audience research, right? Understanding, these are my target customers, and they are very influence-driven through what? Do they listen to podcasts? Do they follow certain journalists? Do they read trade publications? Do they attend industry events, virtually or in person? Is it personality driven, right? Are they in a field where essentially, it's, these 10 people on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, that's who everybody listens to. If you get the answer to that question, you then know who your target audience is for the amplification process. And then you can start to build things that are targeted at, subtly targeted at the audience you want to reach, but initially targeted for amplification, for earning amplification from the people and publications and sources of influence that reach them. And this is actually my favorite form of marketing. I think this process, whether you call it, digital PR or outreach or brand building or whatever it is, placement, the reason I love it so much is because it builds your brand in the way that your customers are already expecting to receive information, right? So it could be the case, and in many cases it is, that your audience, perhaps in a lot of consumer fields, especially where it's high interest but low impact. So there's not a big community around the subject matter. Most of the research is done privately and through search. Great, Google is your friend here, right? Yeah. You want to rank for keywords that your audience is searching for. And so your job is essentially to create content that's going to solve the searcher's problem better than anyone else on page one, and to build a brand that Google will start to associate with those keywords and to earn links to them.
Yep.
But in a lot of cases, that search is not the way. I'm sure you've seen plenty of fields where you go, boy, all the search volume of all the unbranded keywords combined does not equal the leading 3 brands in the space.
We see it quite regularly. I mean, in the B2B space, what you've just analogized, you see quite a lot, because sometimes there's communities and sometimes there isn't. So actually people do turn to search, because obviously, if it's a CEO of a business, they're not going to, go chatting to other CEOs potentially, because it might be a subject that they feel that they only want to share internally. But then you've got other factors where there is no search, but you know that's going on, and how can you tap into that? So are there any examples you can bring that to life with, Rand, to just try and help people understand it a bit better?
Sure, sure. So I'll give two examples, one on the consumer side and one on the business side. So on B2B, for example, SparkToro has zero search volume for anything that we do. No, I don't think there's anyone out there who goes, oh yeah, you know what I would really like? It's audience intelligence at scale, or audience intelligence at all. Even customer research, right? When people perform that search, they don't mean what SparkToro does. When they search for market research, they don't mean what SparkToro does. What we do is simply not searched for at all. It was a problem many people had, but it was not a solution that anyone was aware of in the market. So SEO doesn't help us. We could rank #1 for all these terms and it'd be like, ooh, look, we got 2 customers. Instead, what we had to do is say, who are the people who have this problem? Okay, it's, whatever, digital PR professionals, and it is market researchers, and it is media buyers, and it's persona builders and product marketers and growth marketers. Okay, what do? Well, they pay attention to these people, publications, podcasts, YouTube channels, journalist sources, websites, blah, 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 industry events. Okay. We need to get into all of these places. On the consumer side, interestingly, I've been helping some folks who make indie games. So like, video games that that might be made by a team of 1 to 10 people. They're not really associated with a big game production studio. They have very little funding, but some of these games have been breakout hits, right? They've made millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, Minecraft was originally an indie game. What was it here in Seattle? A one-person studio is responsible for one of the most successful games of the last few years, Stardew Valley. One guy, this guy, Eric, I think he lives around me somewhere. So I was helping some folks in the indie gaming world, and they were looking and saying, hey, people do not, right? Gamers do not go to Google and say, I want you to tell me what are the games that I should play in my particular. No, that's not how it works. It's all recommendations, reviews, YouTube, Twitch, Discord, subreddits, these gaming communities and gaming blogs and websites, right? Places where people have built up influence. And that's what the gaming community sort of pays attention to. And then, the gaming community, of course, being almost everyone, especially the last year, people who've never been into video games before have gotten into them. And so you've got this massive, massive community of people who pay attention to these sources of influence, and then they influence sort of the rest of the market through word of mouth. So look, can SEO do something for you if you happen to rank really well for, I don't know, best life sim games or best games to play in lockdown or whatever it is? Maybe a little bit. But if you are making those games, you're never going to rank for any of those terms. It's going to be these sources of influence who've produced, top 50 lists, top 10 lists, all that kind of stuff that rank for that content. And so your job is to influence them.
Yeah.
I think this is where a lot of this challenge comes into play on both B2C and B2B. There's this strange flip over the last 10 years as SEO and digital marketing have become popular. People start to think purely in terms of how do I rank for these unbranded keywords, rather than how do I influence my customers in all the places they pay attention.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because I was interviewing Simon Kemp, who does the We Are Social Global Report last week or the week before, which is on our YouTube and podcast as well. And he obviously backs up your point around, everyone's been gaming the last 12 months and that whole streaming side of things. But how can you tap into that audience? Because they're not on Google searching what should I be playing. They're in their community, they're in their bubble. So how can you find out what that content is? And how can you then exemplify that to get in front of those people? So it's quite fascinating how sort of what's been going on in the last 12 months, and then just thinking about the communities. And we, as I've said, we find it fascinating in SparkToro. You can just put in a job title or a website or something. There's so much data you can find out, and then like reverse engineer it. And I think you gave that example in your blog, like reverse engineer how you can then create content in that space that is actually going to resonate with that audience and get them to share it with their audience as well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you could, I mean, you could do this research manually, and many people do and have, and that's not, I'm not against that. I think that's fine. But you could use a tool like SparkToro, right, to say, well, my audience uses the hashtag indie games.
Yeah.
Right. I know lots of people on whatever Instagram and Twitter and even a little bit of LinkedIn, right, are using this hashtag and talking about the games that they're making, the games that they're playing, what they love. Journalists use it, all this kind of stuff. So can I plug in my audience uses the hashtag indie games? Oh, here's, whatever, 100,000 plus people who in the last 90 days have used this hashtag on social. What do they follow? Not channel wise, right? So yes, they're on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter and Reddit and blah, 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 blah. But which sub communities do they pay attention to, right? What accounts are they following? Which sources of influence? Is it an indie gaming newsletter that a lot of people are paying attention to over email? There's a lot of industry insiders who are in that world. Or is it, if I'm trying to reach these end consumers for my particular game, who are the reviewers that I need to get my game in front of? Who do I need to like build relationships with and pitch with my game? Who do I need to send them my screenshots and my demo video? And when I go research and see, oh, look, they really love these 10 games, I bet I can position my game in a similar way. Right. And so I'm going to structure whatever it is, my little animated GIF that I send them over email, or the tweet that I send them, or the Instagram DM that I send them, or the Discord message that I send them. I'm going to structure that in a way that my pitch matches things they're familiar with before, and also create some serendipity by, exciting them about whatever's unique about us. All right, this is a way to go. And if I'm creating content, the content is less, I don't know, whatever it is, top 5 ways to, make a great game. It's going to be much more here's this creative, artistic thing that we've built and why it's fun and exciting. And here's some, whatever, lore about the world, or here's something clever and unique that this game does that no other game does. Or here are games that are in this genre that if you love them, you're going to love this too. It's that type of content, right? It's sort of persuading both the sources of influence and ultimately the end consumer after them to pay attention to what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I know, and obviously this is not a SparkToro pitch for anybody today, but it just has so much use to it. And we've shared with some of our clients like some really quite surprising insights in there, because when you're trying to, like you say, you can do this manually, but why would you want to do it manually if you can put some things into a system and you get the answers? And when we work with some clients, they'll often say, oh, I know my audience inside out, they do this, do this, do this. And you put something in, they're like, oh, didn't know that. Or they think actually these people don't do this. Like there is so much insight in there that sort of, you're not trying to knock down the data that they share with you, but just say, do you really know your audience? And I think it's really, really important and helpful with marketeers as well, because again, we see from training and retained from the people we speak to, marketeers, whether it's indie games or marketeers in the B2B niche subjects, they might be marketeers, but they don't know their product inside out. They're marketeers. Their job is not to be a scientist or a game developer. So how can they understand where those people are as well without taking valuable time of them? So again, we help them, often point them in the direction of SparkToro and say, look, if this is your target audience, put it in SparkToro. You can see where they're hanging out. And then if you want to listen to the things they're listening to, then you can see it there, have a listen, and you can start to see the stuff that resonates. And then you then know what you need to create to try and resonate with them as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think the active listening in a community before you participate is incredibly valuable. I don't think there's a better way to become an expert at creating content than to listen to people who are creating content that's already resonating in that field with that audience. That is just going to make you such a better content creator and content marketer than going in blind.
Mm. I think what we see in digital marketing, and I don't know if you see this as well, is because people can play on these playing fields easily. I always say, first of all, you've got exactly the same playing field, whether you're, a big global brand like Nike or a startup. It's how the tactics you play on them. And it doesn't matter how much money you've got. It costs you nothing to listen. We've been given 2 ears for a reason, generally. Like, use them. Don't jump on the platform and start, selling your wares. But too many organizations, big and small, and even more so, I think, in the last 12 months with B2B. Obviously, we do B2B and B2C, but I think B2B has been shaken up a little bit more because you can't go to events, you can't go and network. It's gone into a virtual world, and they're like, oh, how can I engage with people? We're not used to it. So by listening to what your audience is doing, even from a very senior level, you can actually see where you then need to hang out, what type of content that you can create. And it's been very fascinating over the last 12 months, in particular, seeing how things have needed to be shaken up a little bit from the unfortunate thing that is COVID.
Yeah. This is definitely, I think, driven a ton more online behavior in every kind of way. And so even audiences that previously might have been, I don't want to say entirely offline, but less connected to the online world, are now forced to be connected to the online world. And so, we can see, you can see it in the rise of desktop usage the last 13 months, right? You can see it in the rise of web traffic, I think up about 25% year over year. And, that sort of growth is just mind blowing. So even small and local businesses that I've talked to, who they did not really get online until last March. Now, what choice do they have, right? They've got to be online. Online has to be their center, right? They're kicking themselves for not collecting their customers' email addresses in a book inside their, restaurant or shop.
Yeah. And even some of the big global B2B businesses that we've worked in, they're well-established brands. They're brands that they sell a service, but actually sell other services, and they've really sold themselves on the basis of having those face-to-face relationships. And content marketing has been sort of top of their radar, and we've done a lot of upskilling and going, look, this is the journey. So we share with them the whole Gartner B2B journey. Then we get them to think about, what the problem is, where those people are. So using SparkToro to see where those audiences are, because especially if you're trying to make key decision makers like CTOs or CFOs, they might not be doing the research. There might be someone else doing it for them, and then getting into those. So how can you join all of that up? So again, reverse engineering it and listening is so powerful, rather than just going, oh my goodness, we need to create content. What should it be about? I know what we'll do. We'll talk about our new product. No, people don't even know you exist. They don't even know you sell that service. So why are you trying to create content around that side of things?
Yeah, and I love, this is something that I'm very passionate about when it comes to startups and early stage companies, is building your audience before you build your product.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this is, I think, also very true in the world of content marketing. If you have an audience that cares about what you're doing, what you're talking about, what you're creating, what you're publishing, what you're building, and then you launch, right? Whether it's you launch a new blog post, or you launch an event or a webinar or a new podcast, you launch a product, you're going to have a built-in advantage over everyone else if you already attract the audience that's interested in that. And so starting early on and creating work and excitement and teasing folks with what you're creating for a long period of time before you publish it is invaluable. Going back to our indie games example, I can't tell you how many folks there are, who are sort of like, oh, for the last 3 years, our team's been heads down and we finally made our game. It launches today. Oh no, right? Oh no, it kills me, right? That these folks are like, hey, I saved for 10 years so I could take these years off and build this game and, whatever in my office. And that's amazing. Your work is incredible. This game could be amazing. And if you could have taken a few weeks, when you first started creating it, and maybe one hour a week over the last 3 years to just post some stuff and start building up excitement around your game across social channels and with influencers, oh man, the difference it would make on launch day, right? The difference between I emailed the 10,000 people who signed up for our email list, added us to their wish list on their favorite game platform.
Yeah.
That difference is monumental. And this is true across any industry, any service or product that you're building.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like you said, if they've been, if they've head down and they've been doing it for 2-3 years, money must be running pretty tight. So they need to see
Yes.
ROI pretty quickly. And now they're almost like, okay, so I've got that project done. Now I need to do this one. Yeah, but you could have been doing that one at the same time. And again, we see it on a regular basis. Oh, we've been creating this product for 4 years, now we're ready to launch. Okay, well, why haven't you been talking about that since before now and building that sort of 1P data, making that? Because like you said, if you'd done that, you would then be emailing people on launch day. They're going to talk about on social, and then you're actually getting, I always call them free marketeers. The best marketeers are the free
Yes.
that love talking about you. They're the ones that are going to convert the most business. So why have you not been doing that?
Yeah, I mean, the power and influence of having even a small handful of people who aren't particularly well followed saying amazing things about your product as it's launching or growing is invaluable. We've used that in a ton of ways with SparkToro, just seeing people, whatever, they create a little video about how to use the product and what they've been doing with it. And so I'll share that on my channels, and it's so much more resonant, so much more powerful when it comes from an independent source that has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
Right. A couple of weeks ago, there was a woman in Ireland who works in the recruiting industry, staffing industry, and she filmed a little 3-minute Loom video about how she uses SparkToro in the staffing field to find sources that'll cover the jobs that she's looking to amplify and all this kind of stuff. So great. She didn't even tag me. I found it through somebody else. And I just posted it on our social networks, to my LinkedIn, to SparkToro's Twitter and my Twitter. And my God, we used it in an email, right? We sent it out to some of our users, and the response was phenomenal, right? Like, oh, I've never thought of this use case before. This is so cool. I think that's underappreciated, and you're not going to get it unless you've been sort of building up that audience interest over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of goes full circle because, like I said earlier, people are too busy trying to create that instant ROI. And there are certain instances when you can get that instant ROI, but if you want to build a real community and real longevity around things, creating content, whether it's, we do a lot of free webinars, free conferences, free downloads. And much like you, we get people contacting us and they actually know me better than either of them, because they go, oh, someone recommended me to your podcast. I was like, who's that? Oh, this person. I don't even know who they are. Oh, they heard you talk at a conference last year and they did this and they did that. And again, you're building free marketeers and free people that are generating business, which has a lot more traction than on top of the SEO, the PPC, the social email stuff you're doing. But it's just really tapping into that audience by using these bit of kit here.
Yeah, I love that.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Rand. Are there any sort of actionable, you've given us a huge amount of actionable takeaways today, but any other sort of, one key other takeaway that you want to share with people?
Ooh, gosh, I think one of the best things that you can do for sure is, if you've been collecting the email addresses of your customers and potential customers, I love, this is a manual process, but I love emailing them and asking them, questions like, how did you hear about us? What do you follow in this space? What do you pay attention to? What's really impactful for you? Do you have an example of something that you saw for the first time and went and checked it out? And just through those types of stories, you can learn so much about what resonates with your audience. You can have these conversations in person as well. And then if you want, right, you can analyze them at scale in sort of a anonymous, aggregated way with a tool like SparkToro.
Yeah, excellent. If people want to find out more, Rand, where's the best place for us to point them today, do you think?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So in terms of SparkToro itself, you can go to the homepage, sparktoro.com, and try it for free. So run some searches, 10 searches a month for free every month. And if you are looking for the blog posts that we've been discussing, those are at sparktoro.com/blog.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rand. It's been
Yeah.
amazing to chat to you, and thank you for your insight.
Thank you for having me, Lynsey. Take care.